press A button to activate Spirit Gloss mode.
We are two best friends who happen to be psychic mediums.
We do readings, we teach, we mentor, and we love to laugh.
Yeah, and you know what? We love to cry too, because we're heartstring pulling mother truckers.
Warning, this is rated E for explicit, so if you don't like the word fuck, you should probably turn your ass around.
Turn it around. Don't look back, run. But if you're sticking around, it's time for another episode of I'm a Medium.
Ask me how.
Data Willie. Oh, Data Willie.
Matthew Tao, do you know who we have today?
Yeah, I can tell you who we have. We have my sweet Patty. It's my Patty.
No, it's my sweet Patty.
It's my Patty, and I'll push you over and fight you in the streets for it's my Patty. But we have the legendary, the incomparable, and the multifaceted Patty Stovall.
Welcome, Patty.
Oh, thank you guys. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, for our listeners that may not know you, and I don't know who doesn't know the amazing Patty Stovall, but for our listeners who don't, tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Okay, well, my name is Patty Stovall. I am a psychic medium, spiritual teacher, and my specialty, of course, is to be a grief coach. I have been doing this work for roughly about 28 years. My background is in mental health and substance abuse. I hold a bachelor's degree in psychology in specialty in addiction, and then I have an MBA and also in finance and marketing. So I have been doing this work for a long time. I love this work. Personally, was a mother of two. I recently lost my daughter to a fentanyl poisoning, and I am a grandmother of 4. Ooh. But I look really young still. So
yes, you do.
I'm just like, you're so young to have grandbabies. I don't understand.
Yeah.
So you said you specialize in grief, and I think like anytime that I usually have somebody, and I have a little understanding of grief, but anytime that somebody has a really in-depth conversation, I always send them to you because I feel like you kind of just said it. It's your specialty. So I kind of like what you understand. Can you tell people about like what that entails? Like, what does that mean? Like a grief specialist?
Well, it's interesting because some years ago, when I was kind of doing some training, we had to kind of pick a specialty area. And I've come from a background of addiction, and I've done a lot of my own work. And I knew that in this industry, it was so important to take time to do our own healing. And that it required us to really dig deep and do some grief work. And grief isn't always the loss of somebody. Sometimes it's grieving our past, or grieving our childhood, or grieving maybe things that we never got to do. And so I've done a lot of that work, and I thought, well, this is something that I was noticing in others when I became kind of a spiritual teacher that wasn't being helped with other students. And so I kind of zoned in on that area. And plus, I was having some difficulty with my daughter, and during that time, and dealing with ambiguous grief, because there's different types of grief, and I can kind of touch on those in a little bit. But so I kind of started to do some studies with some other professionals on that type of on grief, and really kind of studied it in depth, and then tried to teach others on how important it was, because we were dealing with, as a medium, people who had lost and are dealing with grief. So grief isn't just when someone passes. I learned that there was a lot of color to grief, a lot of depth to grief. But it really came from my own healing work that I really thought this is something that is not being touched on in the spiritual community.
Absolutely. And you would think as mediums, we would be more well versed in it.
Hmm.
But, I find, especially as with working with developing mediums, we're so focused on our connection with spirit that we forget that the whole purpose of doing this work is to connect with the person receiving the reading, right? And the healing that happens between that soul to soul connection of the loved one who is crossed over and the person receiving the reading, and that there's a lot of grief being experienced in that, and where is that person in their grief
Yeah.
process. And like I said, there's this focus on like, well, how do I get out of the way, or how do I develop this clair, or how do I do this, that we forget delivery. We forget that this person is at this certain place. Or what do we do when we do deliver this beautiful, amazing mediumship reading, but our client is in a place of despair after the reading, having resources for them and all of
Mhm.
that. There's a big hole missing in a lot of people's development because they don't have the proper grief training or the proper resources to give their sitters or their clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Absolutely. And I've also found that um, as they're developing, they're often triggered in their own stuff. So they're very excited about learning their clairs, and then all of a sudden they start to get in, and then something comes up that they may have from their own past. Could that be uh, an issue maybe of trauma or abuse or neglect, that's something that they may not have resolved, and this grief starts to rise, and then that may shut them down. This fear happens, and those are things that need to be addressed, and it gets scary. That's when as a teacher, you have to be very observant of your students when something like that happens, because you you may have to approach them and say, what's happening? Is something coming up? Because I've had some students that has happened, and we had to talk about that and say, these are things that you may have to go and take care of for yourself,
Hmm.
because it can get in the way of you learning. And I've had to have that's happened to me. Well, we've seen that experience for myself when I lost my daughter. I've had to step back for a good year because my grief of that pain and suffering stopped me from doing this work. And it really did. It scared me because I thought, am I going to be able to ever read again? Am I ever going to be able to connect again? In my psychological mind, I knew that I could, but the pain and suffering of grief scared me, and in that part of the brain thought, I'm never going to be able to do this again.
Hmm.
I love the fact that you pushed pause and you took I always say
Mhm,
take a selfish. You took a selfish to work on yourself and not bypass it, because a
mhm,
lot of people don't take that time and they try to work through it. And then it becomes almost like a passenger in your life that's kind of driving,
mhm,
and it just kind of goes off course, right? Because we don't know where our grief can lead us. I think there's a lot of
mhm,
triggers in this work. And especially if you don't do the work on yourself, that
mhm,
it keeps coming up, coming up, coming up, and it's almost like being re-traumatized every
mhm.
single day because we're choosing not to look at, I don't even want to say the worst part of us, but the hurt part of us.
Yes.
And we're not trying to embrace that and make ourselves more well-rounded by just taking care of ourselves.
Mhm,
And so I just want to commend you on saying it's brave. And I know a lot of people are like, that's not brave, but it really is brave to put something, especially that's a passionate and that's a huge part of you, on hold, to work on yourself, and but also to hold space for what we're going through. So first
mhm,
and foremost, thank you, thank
Hmm.
you, thank you, thank you for saying that.
mm. Well, thank you.
Well, and it's that personal development. We talk about it a lot. And a lot of people that start their development journey with us are always shocked how much personal development gets wrapped up in that. And you kind of talked about that, Patty, is like how we start developing and we start doing mediumship, and then something gets triggered in us. And it's beautiful in a way. And we have to honor the beauty that does get triggered in us, right? Because it's something that needs to be addressed and makes us a better, more whole human when we do address the things that we need to address in ourselves. When there is that personal thing that needs to be addressed or healed or examined. But that does happen in mediumship. And we always, Matt and I always joke around, if there's something going on in your life, it doesn't have to be as big as grief, but let's say you're having a fight with your best friend over XYZ. XYZ is going to be happening in every single reading. You're going to see these themes popping up in every single one of your readings, because Spirit's like, got to deal with this. You got to deal with this. You got to deal with this. So there's a way of like your personal development right in line with spiritual development.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It will keep showing up and showing up until it gets healed all the time. Always, always. Yes.
And it makes us better readers. It makes us better practitioners if we just do the work and show up. So what do we do? Because that's the question. Okay, so now we're showing up, we're working, we're doing all of that, and ouch, there's an ouchie that shows up. And it could be a grief thing, it could be a life thing or whatever. What do we do when it shows up?
Right. So some of the things I think that I talk about are, we say self-care. We talk about the number one thing, self-care. Well, that's great. What is self-care? And, it's not as easy as it sounds, because, self-care, when you break it down, is complex a little bit. And it's different for everyone, because there's no right or wrong way in grief, or really in any self-care practice, because we have to define what works for that individual. And then, in self-care, we talk about boundaries. A lot of times people struggle with boundaries. I know that I did. I struggled with boundaries in my life, especially growing up in a home that was addiction. We didn't learn how to say no. Learning how to say no was really difficult. There was a lot of guilt, shame around that for a long time. So people, really have to practice that. So, really defining with your student or whomever you're working with, or yourself, is finding where whatever works for you. Some things could be, we talk about in the brain, when our brain gets hijacked from grief, our amygdala, it goes into that overdrive, and that affects our heart and our blood pressure. So meditation, breathing techniques are very good, especially for someone who has lost a spouse or a child, because at nighttime those thought processes continue over and over again. So, maybe someone at nighttime, like myself, needs that meditation at nighttime, because broken heart syndrome is a real thing. And there's a lot of studies show that people who lose children can have heart attacks. So, finding things that work for you individually are important. Number one thing too, like Matt said, taking that time out, stepping back when you need to, because waves of grief, or not even just grief, but when you're dealing with something, you need to step back and reevaluate what that is for yourself, and take that time to process. Sometimes I take a couple days away and I'll stay in bed and watch trashy TV. I eat junk food, you know what I mean? I was like, I need to cry and write anger letters and whatever that is, because I need time to self-care, And then one of the things that I work with clients that I think is important, and I think is good for everyone, is and I know, Dana, you talk about this too. So when we're in depression, we're in the past. And all of us who are deal with anything, we always go there. I still do. I think about the past with my child, what I could have done, w- things that happened. And then when we're in the state of anxiety, we're in the future. We're worried about what we could have, what's going to happen tomorrow, or what I'm going to miss with her. And so challenging our thought process, asking ourselves, where are we? Because when we're in that present moment is when we're most grounded. So, how do
Mhm.
we get to that place? How can we get to that specific place today, in this present moment? There are some things that I work with clients where I tell them to get a hula hoop. Get a hula hoop in your home and go stand in that hula hoop. That's your boundaries. That's your present moment. And how can you get there? And ask yourself, where are you? Are you in the future? Are you in the past? And how can you get to that place? And put things in that space that can bring you back here. What are you grateful for? Can you dance in that space? Can you clean house in that space? Can you know, go for a walk? Can you get outside? Can you get in nature? Do things to bring you back to this present moment. Call a friend. What just come back to the present moment. Not to say that you shouldn't process your past or things around your anxiety. Sometimes you need to see a clinician or a counselor if it
Mhm.
gets to this prolonged grief, which is clinical kind of grief. Um, but trying to get yourself back to that, challenging your thought process. And then, of course, getting that support, finding your tribe, finding people who will
Mhm.
understand you in your grief, because they'll never walk your grief. It's very personal, but finding those people that will understand you.
Hey, Patty, I know for a lot of people, grief makes you numb, right? And
Mhm,
and so it kind of makes us so we're not emotionally intelligent for us to actually be very grounded in the moment
mhm,
because I feel like we don't know what we're feeling. And
mhm.
just so for our listeners who don't kind of understand the stages of grief or the processes of grief, do you mind breaking those down for our listeners so that way they maybe if they're going through grief, they can understand where they might pinpoint themselves in this moment to help ground them.
Okay, so I might not be the right person to talk about stages of grief because I don't
Mhm.
really agree with stages of grief. I believe they're kind of more cycles of grief.
Yeah.
And we move through them in and out. And I know from my own personal studies of research, particularly like parents, um, one of the studies that I had done through the health and general neuroscience, that 94% of parents who lose a child grieve forever. But
Mhm.
as they develop through their grief or go through their grief, they build their life around grief. So I have a kind of a different sense of that. But, you know, grief and it really is part of our brain and so that we have this shock, the initial shock
Mhm.
of grief. And from my own experience, yeah, I had a shock where I lost any sense of what's happening around me. And so this is part of the stages. You have that initial shock, and then you kind of move through this um, like denial. Like, is this really happening to me? I can't believe this happens to me. And and then generally there's this sense of anger that comes at some point, and you move kind of in and out. Sometimes you can move through them all in one day.
Mhm.
Um, and then there's this bargaining, like, I wish this wasn't happening to me, or uh, can I have them back, and then there is this last stage of acceptance. And to me, I don't really understand the acceptance. More of it is finding some meaning around it,
Yeah.
and I think that that to me is something you just move through the rest of your life. And there's always these triggers that come up. And I think that just comes with that processing in your brain, trying to understand things, trying to process things. I saw a friend of hers and it triggered all types of emotion. And then I went right back into kind of a shock feeling, like remembering the call. When I had COVID, I didn't want to go to the hospital because I knew that I would have to walk that hall to see where she died. And it took me right back into that shocking moment 16 months ago. So it can take you right back to the beginning of when you had the loss. So I think you just kind of move fluently through in and out. Um, from some of the things that I've been through with like David Kessler, who is a really big grief coach in this world, he says the first 2 years are the toughest. Um, everyone has a different opinion on those stages. I
Mhm.
think they were really created from a nursing perspective, but
Yeah.
but all emotion happens
Mhm.
at all
I
times.
love that.
All
I love
happens.
that you said it's cycles, and I actually really like that as well because
Mhm,
you know what? It's almost like returning, and you can be multiple parts of that. You can be a mixture of it, and I
mhm.
think that's where a lot of people, when they have grief, they don't know where they fit, and it
Right.
can feel really lonely, and it can be like nobody understands this roller coaster that I'm going through and how it's affecting you. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for clarifying
Yeah,
that,
I
Patty.
also feel like a lot of people feel like they're backsliding. If they have a bad day, like,
Mhm.
oh, I've had like I'm making some great progress, and then they have something like what you had mentioned. You had COVID, Patty, and then having to go back to the hospital and getting triggered back into, a really bad emotional state, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm right back where I started. And I think people
Mhm.
have to remember that, things like that, or holidays or anniversaries, or sometimes even like a song coming on the radio or a
Yes.
scent, can put us right back. And that's the brain, right? The brain
Right.
is amazingly powerful at bringing
Yeah.
us right back into those places. And we're
Mm.
always going to miss those people. And I don't think that grief is something that, everybody's like, when is the grief over? I don't think grief is ever really gone. It
Right.
changes.
Correct. Well, it changes us.
Hmm.
The
Mhm.
loss changes us. And I think we have to rebuild our life around that person because we love them so much. It's part of us that kind of dies off with them. And so I think some of the people that I've learned to work with, when they're told that, when they understand what's happening to them, it's kind of like a relief because I think when they understand, like, there's 5 stages of grief, is this going to be over? And when they're told it's never over, they're like, oh, okay. It's
Hmm.
kind of like a relief. And then when you
Mhm.
learn, I teach them a little bit about the brain, like what's happening in their thought process. They get this part of that, you know, the brain, the grief fog. We talk about the grief fog, and because we forget things, you get that forgetfulness that happens in the limbic system and part of the brain, and that prefrontal cortex where we can't, like, remember things, kind of like a teenager, it all goes away kind of thing, and then that fight
Mhm.
or flight feeling you get, because in the initial stage, that's what gets taken over, and we've it's our protective system,
Hmm.
that shock, especially if it's traumatic. And then, I talk about each type of grief because there's different types of grief. We have anticipatory grief. Um, we have ambiguous grief where we're grieving someone who's living. I've dealt with that, and that's a tough type of grief to deal with. And we have collective grief, which we all deal with when we have a catastrophe in our country. And people don't know what that really is, but we
Hmm.
have that anxiety everybody feels when something happens around us. So we learn about the different types of grief so people can kind of feel like, oh, I'm not crazy.
Hmm.
I'm not
Yeah.
Mhm.
crazy. What I'm feeling is okay. And we learn that grief is very personal and sacred. This is mine.
Mhm.
This is my grief. Because even in a group, let's say I tell someone who loses a spouse, you can go stand in a room with a bunch of people who lose a spouse. Everyone will understand you, but your grief is personal. It's yours and it's sacred and it's special and it's your love. And when someone understands that, that's beautiful.
Mhm.
To me, that's beautiful. And
Mhm.
then they can really process that in a different light. To me, I think that's something different than feeling like nobody's there for me, nobody loves me, nobody cares for me, everything is out external. No, they can go within and learn how to heal that. I think that's a different type of healing for grief.
Yeah. I like what you just said there because I think, we compare our journeys a
Mm,
lot, and we
Mhm.
might have lost somebody and somebody similar may have lost somebody similar in their life. And we could look at them and be like, well, they're doing so good. Why are they doing so good? And I'm struggling the way that I am. And knowing that each of our paths is unique and but each individual person is unique and each individual situation is unique. And you had talked about different types of grief. So if there was anticipatory grief, this person was suffering with cancer and you knew that
mhm,
they were going to be dying and they were under hospice care and there was all of this going on and then they passed away. There's different layers of grief that goes on. And
mhm,
then there's the other thing where sometimes people aren't even allowed to process their grief because of trauma or things that are going on. Maybe there's great financial pressure going on at the time of somebody's passing and you're just trying to figure out how to make funeral plans, how to
mhm.
get if it's a spouse or somebody that dies, how am I going to get the kids raised or how am I going to do this, that you can't even focus on yourself for a while. So
Right.
grief might take a back seat for a while and then
Yes.
all of a sudden it's like, oh, here you are. I know for me personally, one of my biggest grief parts was I lost my dad when I was 11, and I never was allowed to grieve him.
Mm,
And it was just like, okay, we're just going. And
yeah.
then at about the age of 38, it came to roost finally. And I
Yeah.
remember sitting in therapy and I was like, I feel really stupid talking about this. And the
Right.
therapist said, well, when did you ever grieve him? And I was like, well, that I should be over it. And he's like, but when did you ever grieve him?
Right.
And so it's like either you do it now or you do it later, but you got to do it. And so
Yeah.
I think, there's so many of us out there that didn't process it. And again,
Right.
with mediumship development, that will come to roost, right? So
Right.
when we've been hiding it away, and we start developing this, it shows up.
Yeah. And that's a very good point because when we also talk about like if we don't do it, we'll how you know you it gets internalized, and that sometimes can show up in health problems.
Mhm.
It can show
Mhm.
up in relationship issues. It can show up in other ways in your life. And if you have a lot of these issues that are happening around you, sometimes those are unresolved issues that haven't been worked out. And, you know, we see it all
Mhm.
the time,
Yeah. And
you
it's
know.
hard because then it becomes layered and you
Mhm,
don't know where to start. And it really kind of makes it so you don't know, like going back to like emotional bypassing, like you've bypassed it, it's now created multiple problems. And so
mhm,
then in turn, you're not only having to fix your grief, you're having to fix layers and layers and
mhm,
layers of things.
mhm,
So, I saw a beautiful diagram, and you had mentioned something that really kind of struck my interest, where it's saying that grief doesn't go away, right? And we learned how to embrace grief, and it was a diagram of like four different sized glass jars, but the grief was the same size ball, in every single jar
Mhm.
of just learning what, and I don't really like the word acceptance, because I don't think we ever accept that somebody's gone, but
Mhm.
creating a new normal around where the grief would be. Can you talk about like your experience as somebody that's had a recent loss, of what it's like for you to get to a new normal for yourself?
Hmm. I'm still working on that.
Mhm.
um, well, I think that, you know, finding that being in that present moment is really important, because sometimes getting if being in the past and the future is dangerous for me if I'm there too
Mhm.
long. So working on things that find meaning in my life, like turning my pain into some purpose, um, and also making sure that I'm checking in with myself. Self care is critical, because I'm working with clients and working with people, and that's very important. And one of the things that my very first mentor said to me, you can only take your clients and people as far as you are in your life. And so training is critical. I cannot, to me, I have, if I'm not taking care of myself in a professional manner, then I'm not going to do work. And so, even when before I went back to work with clients, I went back and did some circles and some training, because I felt like I better just do a few to check to make sure that I am connected well. And
Mhm.
so, I did some classes and I did some things that I needed to do to make sure that I was in a good place. And I think it's important. I don't care if I'm doing this work 50 years. I think it's important that we continue to grow and keep moving forward, because I can't take students, I can't take people as far as we are. So I think that's critically important as well, personally and professionally, to make sure that I'm checking in on a regular basis and taking care of myself. Um, so yeah, I think that's one of the things that's critical.
I love that, Patty. I think we've kind of touched base on the things around grief. I think what a lot of people struggle with is not that being the person that has lost somebody, but supporting somebody that's going through
Mm,
grief. And I feel like that's where a lot of people feel really disempowered, because our words can only carry so much, right? There's so many I'm sorry's that this person's hearing, or oh, if you ever need anything, call me. I mean, that person probably doesn't know up from down. And so I know when I had lost my dad, it was just words. Like all I could hear was words and I couldn't hear the meaning of it. What are some really great ways to help empower and support somebody that's going through grief?
yeah. Yeah, I that's probably one of the most important things I think that we to touch on. So when I lost, one of the things that people say all the time is, call me if you need anything. I think that's one of the things that you don't want to say to somebody, because that person will never call because they don't know what they need, especially in the early stages of grief. They're so in shock and they really don't, their brain can't process. So, doing things such as maybe bringing a meal and dropping it off, or just being present, asking if you can just sit there. I had some people just come sit in my house, um, and didn't talk at all. Um, just came and sat. I was in my bedroom, I was sleeping, and I was alone, but they were in my house, and that made me feel some contentment. I had people just drop off a meal. So that made me feel good in the beginning. Um, and then a lot of people disappeared. And I think that really was not so much about me. I felt like it was more about their ability not to understand grief or understand me. I still have a lot of people that aren't don't understand grief at all, and or are afraid of grief. And so I think that's really it. And I also feel like just listening. I don't think you need to fix anyone. It's more just about listening to someone process, um, just being there, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
and just doing. It's more about just doing. Even when someone isn't feeling well, when I was sick, someone brought a meal. You know, I think that's the thing in our human race that we forget when someone is struggling, just do it.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Mhm.
Um, because other people don't really know in their struggle or trauma or grief or having a difficult time just to do something, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like people always show up for the funeral. Like we were, but as soon as the
Mhm.
funeral is over, everybody likes, and it's not because people have a mean heart or anything, but it's off their head, right? After the funeral, people kind of, it becomes very quiet. And I think after the funeral is actually when people need to hear from everybody the most. So I always
Mhm.
like try when I know that somebody's lost somebody, I like try to put reminders in my phone, like
Mm,
just check
mm,
in, or if you see a funny meme, even of just like sending them something, just even a touchstone of like a phone call, a touchstone. Let's go out to have lunch. Let's do whatever. And if they want to talk about it, having space to talk about it, but also just to be there and be present. Because I feel like you the same way, Patty, is people are afraid to talk about death. And I think in our society as a whole, people don't want to talk about if you're dying or dead or died. and
mhm,
and people are uncomfortable around that all around.
mhm,
But when you are the one in grief, you feel very lonely.
mhm.
And so even
Mhm.
just having somebody showing up and sending you a funny meme sometimes
Yeah,
can be enough to like switch your day around a little bit, and just knowing that you're on somebody's mind. It's amazing how that can shift your perspective sometimes.
I agree totally. Yeah, I agree. I did
I
have some people that did show up after and um, got in those trenches with me, and it was very helpful. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, you're right. It's tough for people to talk about grief and still even to continue to support, you know, that effort and speak her name.
Mm-hmm.
I think also what's really good is respecting their boundaries, right?
Hmm.
I think that sometimes we get a little too like fragile, like you're fragile, and I just need to like do everything for you. That like listening to them and saying, like, hey, would you like me to come over and clean for you? Or would you like me to do this? And if they say no,
Hmm.
respect that. No, I think what was really hard in my family is people would just show up and do things,
Mm.
and understanding that people are still people and we all still have the way that we like to run our life, and
Hmm.
respecting the boundaries of the person that's also lost somebody, that just because they're hurting doesn't mean that their personality trait it shifts in a way,
Yep.
that they aren't still who they are. I
Right.
think that's what really offended me when it's treating me as if I was this fragile piece of glass. I'm hurting, but I'm not broken
Right.
completely. And you don't need to glue me back together, but just be there and just understand. And people get weird when people, and the reason why I'm saying weird is people do weird and unusual things when people pass away.
Oh.
Like I've noticed that people either get really ugly or really super supportive, and there's nowhere in between. And
Hmm.
because we're either afraid of death or we're not, right?
Right.
So yeah, and just meet somebody where they're at, and hold space for where they're at, because it's going to shift in 2 minutes.
Yes.
And you're going to have to learn to dance.
Oh, that's a good one. Learn to dance. That's right. That's good.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Very true. Very, very true.
I was going to ask you, what's something that you should not say to somebody that's grieving? Just what you should not say, and what can you say to somebody that's grieving that's going to end up being a little bit easier for them to hear.
Um, Well, some of the things that I have experienced from others is because most of the people I know have just disappeared.
Hmm.
um, but some of the other things that I've heard are it's time for you to get over this.
Mm.
It's don't you think that you should start dating somebody else? Um, it's been long enough.
Hmm.
Um, that's a very big one. Other
Yeah.
people put time constraints on your grief. And I've had to help people undo that because they feel so stuck in that.
Hmm.
And they don't even have the ability to say no to those people because it's family members or
Yeah.
because other people are very uncomfortable around that. Um,
Can I add one to that?
mhm.
I miss the old you.
Oh yes, yes, that's
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
too. Hmm. Yep.
Hmm. So what's some stuff that they can say to help support somebody through grief that's going to, because I think a lot of people, we don't know what to say. We don't know what to say. And sometimes it's nothing, but what's some stuff that they can say that can help know that the person that's grieving knows that they're there to support them?
Hmm. Some of the things that people have said was, "I understand. I understand. Um, I'm sorry. I'm sorry is okay." Sometimes the little things just like that. Um, Here's another thing is if you are struggling, don't give me your story too. Just, you know,
Hmm.
uh, you know,
Yes.
I have lost a child, but if somebody has lost a child or lost someone, I will just say that I'm sorry for your loss. I won't say, I lost my child too, and I did it, you know what I mean? I won't give my whole story about me only. So I'm very empathetic to someone else, but I won't go into such detail that it's about me too. So, it's important because, yeah, I think it's important that you care about the other person,
Hmm.
even if you're
Yeah.
struggling too. Um, and I've seen that a lot. Um, some things you can just say are, "I'm here if you need me."
Hmm.
I'm here if you need me. I just
Yeah.
sometimes say that to people.
That was
Um,
that was beautiful.
I love
Sometimes
you.
listen.
I
Yeah.
care about
Oh,
you. Sometimes it's just the basics.
yeah.
you know,
Sometimes
some don't
listening more
say
than
sometimes.
talking.
Hmm. Yeah,
I
sometimes
love
it's
it.
just those, I care about you. I'm here. I love you. I care about you. I think that's my very basic words all the time is I send you love. I care about you.
Hmm.
I love it.
Because
Thank you,
people
Patty.
need
Thank you.
that or it's okay. Um, people need to know that it's okay. Wherever you're at, it's okay. They need to know that too, because sometimes some people think they're going crazy and you're not going
Mhm.
crazy. And, um, you know, one of the things I always want people to know, wherever you're at in your journey, that's right where you need to be. And I think in all aspects, if anything comes out of this podcast, even with students or anyone who's grieving, wherever you're at in your journey is right where you need to be. And so that's where you move forward from, wherever you need to be in this present moment.
Mm. And it's about it's about being present in the moment as much
Present,
as we can.
present in this present moment. Yes,
Mhm.
that's right where you need to be.
Well, speaking of speaking her name, let's speak about Sarah. And because you have a beautiful organization that you built.
I do. I do. Yes. So it's called Sounds of Sarah. And it is to raise awareness. To raise awareness and prevention and education around overdose and illicit drug prevention. Uh, so it's been in existence now for almost 6 months. Can't believe that. Crazy, right? It is a 501c3. And we are having our first big fundraiser on May 13th. We are doing a walk. I'm very super excited about that. I have a fabulous board, thank God, that is supporting that event. But we also are registered through our state Department of Health to distribute Narcan, which has been one of our biggest adventures because our county is short on that. And I've been out pushing that for individuals. So I'm really proud of that, especially that area of work in the organization. So
Where can they donate if they wanted to donate to help support Sounds of Sarah?
yeah, they can go to soundsofsarah.org. We have a button on there that you can make a donation if you'd like. But her story's on there, and the little butterfly meaning of her logo is on there as well. And everything else that we do is getting updated. I just got certified through a program for students in the school, research-based program. So we'll hopefully start pushing to get some education in the school systems, and which is great.
That's amazing.
So it's good.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Patty,
It's awesome.
you are just such an amazing human, and we truly do. We love you with all of our heart, but thank you for all that
Yes.
you do. I mean, we love you as a friend, but we
guys
love you
do.
for
So
everything that you do for our community and for and what you're doing with educating the public, and really taking your pain and making purpose of it is just it's been amazing to watch you create what you've created through all of this. And, you know, we never want anybody to go through what you've had to go through, but you've created something so beautiful, something so beautiful. And I know Sarah's so proud of you. And I want to honor you and just thank you for taking your time. Cause I know, number one, people felt less alone by hearing your words today. They felt heard, and they felt honored in their grief process and learned something today. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on, and we just love you to death.
Thank you for having me. I
I
appreciate that so much. I love you both very much.
I love you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, Patty's a fire medium. A fire medium. Now, are you currently booking as well? Are you currently taking bookings?
I'm so booked. I'm catching up
Okay.
from a year
But,
ago.
well, waitlist. So you can go to,
Yeah,
what is
you
your
can go to
website in case there,
pattystovall.com for that.
thank you. Yes, get on her wait list because you know what? Good people are worth the wait, and Patty is definitely worth the wait because she takes care
Yeah,
of her
I was
clients in
reading all
such a
day
beautiful
yesterday. That's where I was. So
way.
I don't know
Good.
how I do it really, to be quite honest. I
Well,
had over 100 clients to catch up with from last year.
Oh,
so get on her wait list, and if Patty, Patty will read you if Patty reads you, but just go phenomenal. And you're also a teacher as well. And so I know you go to pattystovall.com. Any classes that
And
you
that takes you to
have
my
will be
school.
listed there.
That'll take you to my school.
Beautiful. Well, Patty, I love you deeply. Dana loves you deeply. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No, I love you guys very much. And I do want to say I am so proud of both of you for your business and your podcast and all that you guys do for the community and to help others, and just so much luck in everything that you do. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything.
I love you, Patty.
we love you, Patty.
Okay, we're gonna wrap this up before I start bawling. So, I love you all. You're in our hearts. Do something nice for somebody. And Dana, take it away.
You are the light of 100,000 Patty Stovalls.
That's a lot of light.
That's a lot of light. We love you guys. Bye.
Bye.